Great. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our Delivering Community Benefits from Peatland Projects workshop. Great to see so many people here. I am just going to give a quick introduction to what we're going to do. So we are going to run this session as a community engagement session. So you're going to be shown some tools of what you can actually do when you do some community engagement. Usually they start off with some information, some backgrounds to why you're all here. So that's what we're doing as well today. So we're going to start off with 4 presentations. And after that, we're going to go into some fruit salad hustling, and you will hear what that actually is later. And then we'll do some flip chart work on some questions that we'll post to you later. That's all I'm going to say. So I'm very glad I've got 4 great speakers today. So the first speaker we've got is Uwe Stoneman. He's from the Scottish Land Commission, and he will be talking to us about developing good practice in community benefit sharing. Thank you.
Okay, hello. Yeah, lovely to see lots of people in this workshop. I wasn't really sure what the turnout is going to be. I don't know if you know, but I used to work in nature conservation, and it does remind me a little bit of when I was a nature conservationist. I used to go to a meeting of farmers, and they would all have lots of problems and lots of work to do, and I would say, oh yeah, but there's nature to consider. And they'll go, oh Christ, here it comes with nature, we've got plenty to do already, and they weren't always that receptive. And now I feel, now that I work for the Land Commission, I feel like I do the same with community. You've got all of you in the room, and you're all sitting here going, my to-do list is already this long, and now he comes along with this community stuff. So hopefully, in my talk, I can show you, A, that there is a government expectation to do this stuff. I can show you that there is a possible win-win in doing this, and I can also tell you, and I can tell you that right now, that the Scottish Land Commission is there to help anybody who wants to show leadership in this sector or who has got any questions. So, my name is Uwe Stoneman, and I am working for the Scottish Land Commission, and I am a good practice advisor. This is the team. We're quite a small government agency. We were formed in 2017 following the 2016 Land Reform Act, which created 2 things. One was the Scottish Land Commission, and the other one was the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about responsibilities and rights to do with land in Scotland. And the Land Commission is here to implement this. And when I talk about rights and responsibilities in connection to land, this is not just about land ownership. This relates to any activity that is done on land, and that includes peatland restoration and, of course, any other nature restoration. So we're based in Inverness, not too far from here. And one of the things that we do, so we provide advice to people who do work on the ground, but at the same time we then feed back what our experience is, talking to people like yourselves who are working on the ground, and we feed that back, and that will then go into our policy advice. So one reason why I'm here today, a big reason, is that I really want to listen to you, your concerns, your questions, and I want to take the outcomes of this workshop back to the Land Commission. So I'm just going to run very quickly through some of the legislative framework. So we have land reform in Scotland, and what I'm saying is really very much geared towards Scotland, because the legislative and the framework and the guidance around land is different in the different countries in the UK. So I'm going to talk about Scotland specifically, but I hope it is relevant to places anywhere in the UK. So the first thing is, this is the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. It's been reviewed in 2022 and actually now fits on, well, the gist of it fits on 1 A4 page. So if you're really interested, you can print that out and stick it above your desk. It's got these 3, there's a lot more stuff in there, but for today, I think that those are the 3 main points. That it's about transparency, it's about engagement, and it's about benefits. And benefits is what we're here to look at today. There is actually a reference to Scottish Land Commission guidance documents and to our people engagement protocol in the Peatland Code, as you will see down there, or if you can't read it, just believe me. So it is there, and we're very glad that it's there. There is a specific angle which is about natural capital investment, and we all know that without actually having that, there just isn't enough money in the purse to do all the peatland restorations that we need, so we need that. But the Scottish Government is really clear by saying this needs to be done in a responsible way. And this is the statement it has produced. Again, you can find that on the website. It's quite useful. It doesn't just say things about communities, it also says that if you invest in peatland restoration, it actually has to work. It has to suck up carbon, it has to fix the peat. So it's overall responsible, not just on the community side of things. When we talk about community benefits, these are actually defined already. Scottish Land Commission has produced this document, and I've got a few hard copies with me, but you can download it from our website as well. And this has been done with all the stakeholders that are listed on the right, so it's been talked about a lot, and it isn't going to tell you exactly what a benefit is, and you can't go in there like a shopping list and say, I'll do, benefit 6/B. It's not like that, but it defines what benefits should be, and I'm just going to go into there's 6 principles in there which are important to be aware of. And that really sums it up. If you're thinking about what is a community benefit, think about those things. They have to be meaningful, they have to be local, they have to align with strategic plans, they have to be tailored to the community's needs and wants maybe, and they have to be agreed with the community. They should be monitored and reported on. And that's very important because I know some peatland projects are bigger than others or smaller than others. They have to be proportionate to the size of the project. There's no way you can expect a 15-hectare peatland restoration project on a farm to provide similar benefits to a 1,400-hectare peatland restoration project on a massive nature reserve. So, as I said, I worked in conservation, and actually, I was lucky enough that I worked at Abernethy. I was senior site manager at Abernethy, and I was actually involved in peatland restoration, so I have some practical experience, and this is where I really understand that you're all sitting here going, I have a big to-do list already. How do I integrate this? So hopefully, the workshop today will help to make you, to come up with ideas how you can deliver these community benefits in a way that works practically on the ground. You can learn from each other, and maybe, hopefully, you see it's actually not as laborious as you think. So the other thing I want to point you towards is that we've done some research, and the paper was just published yesterday. I hashtagged it to this conference. Some of you might have seen it. But we've done this. We interviewed 6 people working in different positions on 6 projects, restoring nature in not just peatland, but restoring nature in the Cairngorms National Park. And we've asked them, what community benefits are you actually providing? What would you like to provide? What are the obstacles? What are the opportunities? And one of the things there's a couple of things I want to draw your attention to quickly. One is the first sentence. Quite a few of the people interviewed said, well, actually, now that you described what a community benefit is, I realize we are actually providing community benefits already. We're just not really that aware of it, and we're not making the most of it. We don't monitor them, we don't report on them, but they're actually there, and it's a really important thing to think about. The other things, you will recognize some of them. So the whole idea of uncertainty in a carbon market, is really a problem when you want to provide benefits, because you don't want to give things away that you don't get in the end. But there is work being done at the moment towards a a market framework for natural capital investment, which will be published later this year. And lost my train of thought, need to recapture it. Yes, and one of the things that is geared as part of this, there's a big group of people, some of which are in the room here, who are working on a benefits standard certification, which will go into the framework, and it will actually also go into a BSE, British Standards of Industry, BSI standard, so it will actually be wider than just Scotland. And part of that is to make sure that investors are gaining some certainty and confidence, which is something that, that's the problem with the uncertainty around it. So all these things you will all know about. I want to draw your attention to the last one, which is what I said at the beginning, that there is a potential for mutual benefits. And the mutual benefits, there's a quote from somebody who was interviewed. If you can't read it because it's quite small, the mutual benefits are really about, so the investor confidence is one mutual benefit, obviously, but what they have all talked about is the longevity of the project. Peatland restoration isn't for today, it's not for tomorrow, it's going to be for a long, long time. It's a long-term investment. And without community support, it's really, really difficult to see how it can last its lifetime, how it can be sustainable. So that's what people talked about. It gives you the buy-in of the community, and that makes sure that your project is secured for the future and it's socially sustainable. So that's it from me. That's all I have to say. Just to come back to my point at the beginning, if you find some of this puzzling, if you have some questions, I have some documents with me, I have this with me, and I've also got this leaflet with me, which is basically community benefits, community engagement, land commission, land reform, everything in one leaflet. You're welcome to have these. And also they are on our website. And please remember, the Scottish Land Commission is there to help anybody who wants to provide community benefits but maybe isn't quite sure about how it can best be done. So we're here for you if you want us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have time for some questions, if anybody might have some questions for Uwe.
Thank you. I'm Alex Curry. I'm the Natural Capital Tool Manager for NatureScot. And I had a question about the definition of community benefits. So imagine that's something that changes from one place to another, and one project to another, and one community to another. So I was curious as to if you had any thoughts about how you develop common definitions of community benefits in such a way that they might be tracked as well, and how you might sort of compare the community benefits that somebody, let's say, undertaking a peatland project, a peatland restoration project, might sort of identify, and how to pair those up with, let's say, other perceived benefits from the likes of maybe common grazings or communities of place or space.
So the benefits are really, the definition is really in here, and hopefully that will, it's broad enough to really be interpreted in the right way for each project. So that's where I would start. There's also the work that we're doing with regards to the community inclusion certification, and that also defines this a bit more and makes it a bit more specific, and Rachel will probably touch on that in the next, in her talk. So when you started your question, you said how you define community, and then you carried on benefits. I was actually thinking maybe you asked about how to define community, because I've been asked that a few times today, and I don't have an answer, and that's a real, you probably saw that was on the list of what people told us what's an issue. And it is an issue, what's a community, but as a starting point, every peatland restoration project, any nature restoration project in Scotland, has a point on a map. And every point on the map in Scotland has got an area which is allocated to a community council. And the Scottish Land Commission's recommendation is this is a good starting point. Find out which community council area your project is in, and that could be more than one if it's a big project, and start with the community council. And nobody can then say you haven't gone through the official channel. There may be some challenges with community council. Not every place has an active community council, but it is a good starting point. And then take it from there.
Great, thank you very much, Uwe. We are now moving on to Rachel Nixseaman, and she is a community engagement practitioner and the director of Deciding Matters. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Rachel Nixseaman at Deciding Matters. We are a deliberative democracy organisation, which I know is a completely meaningless term, but essentially it means that we do quite intensive community engagement processes with national and local government, with think tanks, with charities, and most recently we've been working with a lot of nature-based projects as well, so that's been really exciting for us. We are neutral and apolitical, inclusive and accessible, and we are advocating, much like a lot of your projects, for longevity, sustainability, and accountability. As Uwe mentioned, we are part of a really exciting consortium that are working together through a Ferns-funded project to create a community inclusion standard. So we've got a few people in the room who are working on that, and it's also quite an open process, so we're always happy to take perspectives and insights. But essentially what we've done is created a best practice guide for community engagement, and that is to then support people to create a community benefits agreement, and then to eventually work through an auditable framework to achieve certification and evidence that you are doing the best, not just for nature, but for people as well. I don't have time today to go through all of it, so I'm just going to highlight some of the key questions that will help you if you are starting to think about community engagement. So there's some key principles to co-design, and this is transferable to any sort of deliberative community engagement process. So that's participation, so who are you engaging with? How are they engaging with this? Is it transparent? Do you have diversity and breadth of voice and representation? That's the development of your process. Is it accessible? Is it inclusive? And are you able to adapt to the potentially changing needs of your community and your probably rapidly evolving projects? About ownership and power, so who is actually able to make these decisions, and how and where can we address power imbalances, and that might be where you are trying to meet community needs, and that's potentially clashing with kind of ministerial or legislative needs, but it could also be that within the group you have one community member that is very, very chatty versus somebody that's very shy, and how do we make sure that everyone has an equal voice as much as possible. And finally, thinking about our outcomes and intent. So do we have a really clear vision for this community engagement process, and are we setting realistic expectations? So I can't apparently work the buttons. So for participants, this is quite a linear process. They are recruited as a participant, they work through and develop with you, they go through this process, they start thinking about the decisions they've come up with, who really takes ownership of that, how are those followed through, and then what does that actually look like, what is the outcome? This is absolutely not a linear process for you, although I'm sure you'll do a great job of making it look like one. So, as practitioners, we often have to start with the outcomes and intent. Why are we doing a community engagement process? And what are we going to do with the outcomes from this? Then on to ownership and power. Where do we actually have power to influence decision making and be a good force for change? Then on to participation. So who are we recruiting? Who are we bringing into this process? Then we're actually developing through the process. And then that takes us back to the outcomes and what we're doing with those. So don't worry, I know this is a bit confusing, so I'm going to take you through some key questions for each of these points to really help you with that starting point. And the intention for this is so that you're setting up a process that has really clear and realistic expectations of the community, and to help guide you and make this as easy as possible and as worthwhile as possible. So when we're thinking about outcomes and intent, really honing in on what is the topic, making it really clear. It's fantastic if you can go to a community and say, we can talk about absolutely everything. But if they then start talking about accommodation and you can actually only really talk about access at a particular time, it just is a waste of everybody's energy, really. So the purpose, why are you asking the questions that you're asking? Can it influence real change? Is it going to have a significant impact on your project? And if not, is it worth asking? And the scope. So what parameters are you working within? Where are there areas that you cannot have a community making the decisions? And it's really important to be clear about that. There's a lot of requirements that you're working within, whether that's being up to code, whether that's policy requirements, it could be requirements placed on you by your funders. But if we're communicating that to your community, it means they're more likely to be able to work with you and come up with things that are really realistic and manageable for you to progress with. Thinking about that ownership and power, so who is currently making decisions? And again, that might be funders, it might be kind of at a ministerial level, it might be that there are landowners that have to have final say. So thinking about what those decision-making processes are and those different actors, and where can we address power imbalances? There are likely to be power imbalances that we are unable to kind of even out, and that's fine. Again, it's just about communicating where somebody's vote does maybe have more sway, but also ensuring that everyone can be as involved at an equal playing field as possible. So does everyone have access to the same information, for example? Well, and yeah, be honest on this one. I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but it can be really, really easy to kind of say to a community, yes, we can make all of this change, and then actually not convey that a funder can, because of your grant agreement, make changes at the last minute without much notice and warning. So it's just about being as honest as possible with your community group. Thinking about the participation, who are you targeting? Do you need to have a representative group? Are you thinking about communities of interest, communities of geography? Thinking about how they will best be able to engage with this. Is there certain times of day you know that would not be appropriate, for example, during school pickups, or times of year that will never work, such as during calving and lambing season? Thinking about onboarding, so that's when we've recruited somebody but they haven't started the process yet. So thinking about what information do they need to be able to engage with all of the conversations we're going to ask them to engage with, and what particular or specific needs do they have that we might need to adapt our process to meet. That could be, for example, mobility needs or language needs that we maybe need to bring in translators or think about venues we're using. And that ongoing support, so how are you checking in with them to make sure that they are engaging, they are feeling comfortable, and they do feel able to take part in conversations in a meaningful way. And then finally, this kind of development piece, so how are you evaluating the process throughout, and ensuring that you're actually utilizing that learning to adapt your process and evolve as you go, rather than just having it in a report as a really nice reflection piece at the end. How are you also sharing that learning? So going back to the community and saying, we noticed that this hasn't worked, so this is how we're tweaking our process now. And that adaptability, how are you building in the ability to flex and meet evolving needs as you work through this process? So I've got a couple of case studies for you of some activities that Deciding Matters has done recently. So we worked with the Strathclyde community to do a consultation on beaver reintroductions. As I'm sure many of you can guess, there was a lot of polarizing opinions within the community. So this one needed a lot of planning to ensure that we were bringing people together in a safe space and able to adapt really rapidly as different perspectives emerged, as a bit of a kind of campaign emerged from local groups. And so how are we still ensuring that the community felt able to engage and was doing that in a meaningful way? And then this one's a very different type of project, but it's a good example of a very long-term project with multiple work streams. So this was called the People's Panel, and it was a group of 50 people coming together over 2 years to discuss or identify and then address challenges, solutions, for health and social care in the UK. So thinking about the different types of expertise we would need so that members of the public could understand the differences between NHS and social care, for example. So thinking about what expertise you need to bring in so that people can have deliberative conversations. Some of my deliberation top tips. So have a plan, but only roughly. You want to be able to flex and adapt as you move forward, as different needs are identified by the community and as your project changes. Think about partnership working. Who can you utilize from community groups? Uwe's already mentioned community councils, but are there also citizen science projects? Is there something going on at the school that you can tap into? So really tapping into that external expertise as much as possible. Being as transparent as you can at all stages, so who is holding the power, where is your funding coming from, and sharing reports where possible as well. Considering those lessons learned before you start so that we can continue to adapt and be flexible. Being accountable and planning to share all of our outputs. And then finally, enjoy it. They can be really, really interesting. They can throw absolute curveballs at you, but a lot of innovation comes from community processes as well. And they also can just be really good crack. So that's kind of it for me. If you want to hear more about what Deciding Matters does or find out more about the best practice guide, which is available on the NFCA website as well. So we're kind of still developing that, but I'm happy to talk about it and could talk about it for days. Please do reach out. That's it from me.
For some questions.
Sorry, too keen.
Sorry, I would like, does anyone have any questions for Rachel?
Obviously a really interesting chat from me there. Thanks, guys.
You've stunned everyone. It's been really good. Thank you so much for being here. Right, our next talker is Kenna. Kenna is from the RSPB, and she also works with the Flow Country Partnership. I thought it was a green somewhere. The Flow Country Partnership. So we'll hear about active partnership work and how that actually can be done. Thank you.
Thanks.
No, that way. Here we go. Right. Hello, I'm Kenna Chisholm. My day job is as an area manager for the RSPB, north of Inverness and in the Hebrides, but I'm here talking to you today as a trustee of the Flow Country Partnership. I'll give you a very rapid history of the Flow Country Partnership and peatland restoration, but then I'm going to focus mostly on the last couple of years where we've had a fairly fundamental shift in how we function, and that includes in relation to our local communities. So the Flow Country, 400,000 hectares of peatland in the north of Scotland. I'm sure we've seen this slide many, many times. Peatland soils are quite widespread across the globe, but blanket bog is much more restricted in distribution, generally oceanic, wet, sloping, gently sloping, and sphagnum dominated. And that means that it's quite often very deep and therefore holding a lot of carbon. So the Flow Country is estimated to hold 400 million tonnes of carbon, which is more than twice the UK's woodlands. A fairly unique assemblage of wildlife here, internationally important numbers of breeding waders, water birds and birds of prey, and then our usual stunning bog plants and a wide array of other wildlife in this wonderful landscape. But it's not just wildlife, it's a living and working landscape. So traditionally used for sheep grazing, for cattle grazing, for hunting for deer, and fishing for salmon and trout. And more recently, a new industry that's developing around research. So being so big and having pristine, modified and restoring bog means that it's a perfect laboratory for science around peatlands and climate. But it has a checkered history in terms of management. A perverse tax incentive during the 70s and 80s led to large areas being ploughed and planted. And that exacerbated drainage that had gone in previous decades for agriculture. By 1990, 65,000 hectares of conifer woodlands had been planted across the flow country. A campaign led to the closing of that tax loophole, and then the planting stopped and people turned their mind to restoration. So between 1994 and 2005, there were 2 LIFE projects which experimented with restoration techniques and tried to get the story of the importance of the flow country out into the wider world. And from that came the Peatlands Partnership, which was a loose conglomeration of interested organisations who wanted to work together for the benefit of the peatlands of this area, and wrote the strategy for the peatlands of Caithness and Sutherland. And that led to the Flows to the Future project, over £11 million spent on building a big field centre, a watchtower, scaling up the restoration significantly, both in forest to bog restoration and in open hill ground, and spreading the word through interpretation and education and media work. So at the end of that project, everybody got back together again and said, well, what's next? So we had a big stakeholder workshop at the end of 2020. And from that came the next management strategy from 2021 to 2030. And from that came 2 projects. One, and this is the only slide I'm going to show of the World Heritage Site, but we could probably do a whole day on the World Heritage Site and how we got there. We now have the world's first peatland World Heritage Site, one of only 250 natural World Heritage Sites on the planet, so we should be shouting that from the rooftops. But that's another story. The other project that we were looking at was the development of the Peatland Code and the carbon market, and the potential to use that to scale up restoration across this vast landscape. Looking again more to the open hill ground, because forest to bog is not currently in Peatland Code. Looking at fixing the drains and fixing the hags and the gullies and trying to aggregate projects together to build that up to a landscape scale. We had funding from IRN, so Investment Readiness Nature Scotland, and the follow-up fund Ferns, which allowed us to look at how we needed to be structured to be able to blend that public and private finance across a landscape. And it meant that we had to change from being a loose conglomeration of interested organisations to being a formal charity, and a type of charity that has a company underneath it. So we have the Flow Country Partnership, which is a charity, but underneath that we have Flow Country Restoration Limited, so a company that can deal with all the financial aspects of this. Now the simple model is Flow Country Restoration goes into agreements with landowners, land managers, then plans, manages and maintains their peatland restoration project, then sells the carbon, and the revenue covers the restoration company's costs, pays either an annual income or a profit share to the landowners, and then what's left goes to local communities. That's, again, another one slide that says something that seems quite simple but has been incredibly complicated to work out how that might actually work. And as part of the funding, we went out to our local communities and said, this is what our ideas are. What do you think? How do you think this might work across the landscape of Caithness and Sutherland? And we were met with a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and quite a lot of suspicion in terms of what were our motivations for doing this, how did it work, and what did it mean for things like decisions on future land use and management of that land and control of land. And that made us really take a big step back and go back to the drawing board. Like you said, you think and then you plan and you engage. And we thought, well, how are we going to change this such that communities are embedded in this from the beginning and they're not just an add-on? So we worked with some community champions for quite a long time to think about, well, what are the fundamental issues that we need to get to here to get to that point? And we designed with them a 3-day, fairly intensive workshop for quite a group of people that looked at 3 themes. The first being trust, the second being representation, and the third being our future vision. In terms of building collective trust, that was about sharing our worries and concerns and hopes and understanding of the landscape and breaking down some of those barriers between traditionally potentially adversarial groupings. And it worked really, really well. I think Roxanne Anderson, who's here, I know a lot of you will know her, she said she measured the success of that 3-day workshop as the number of hugs she got at the end of it from people who would traditionally not have maybe spoken to her much. Then in terms of representation, we have 8 trustees and directors, and all 8 work in the Flow Country, and 6 of those 8 live in the Flow Country. So the people of the communities are embedded in this partnership and how it's going to function into the future. And then in terms of principles of community benefit and our collective potential, I'll come on to the community benefit in a second, but in terms of collective potential, it was about sharing our vision and what that looked like. And what we've come up with is a vision of resilient communities within a resilient landscape. You just cannot have one without the other. I'm going to illustrate this with a couple of slides, lots of words. Don't look at the words, just look at where it's in red. And this is where people and communities are mentioned. So this was the 2021 management strategy. There's not much red in there. This is now the current descriptor of the Flow Country Partnership. So you can see there's been a fairly fundamental shift in how we're thinking and how we're working together to deliver our ambition at scale. And in terms of the community benefit angle of it, what became very clear was that there are some fundamental issues that face the communities around Caithness and Sutherland, around big issues like transport, housing, childcare. And rather than have a pot of money that goes to some football strips or playgrounds, what people wanted was anything that we could generate that goes into the local community supports people who are already out there trying to tackle these fundamental issues for those rural communities. So that's how it's going to be structured. But as we're all learning, that pot of gold is some way off in terms of how you structure these types of aggregated projects and where that money might come from. So that's for the future. So what we're now starting to do is look at what we're doing now and how we're doing it and how that fits in. And honestly, this wasn't planned. We're looking at things like the Scottish Land Commission guidance and the community inclusion standards, which have both been referred to in the 2 previous talks. So the bits in orange I've already spoken about, but the bits in white, to move on to them. Transparency about finances. Well, we're a charity, we're going to have open audited accounts that anybody can have a look at in an annual report. Procurement and fair work. So all of our contractors will have to sign up to the Scottish Government's Fair Work First guidance and principles. And then in terms of our tender scoring, we have a criteria which is looking at community support, community benefit. Then looking at the wider direct and indirect benefits. Just a few weeks ago was run the first training up in the Flow Country for restoration training to businesses. And it was oversubscribed. We're hoping to be able to run it again. But it was mostly young people from Caithness who want to get into this emerging industry, and that was really, really encouraging to see. When we have open days for contractors who want to come and look at a site, it's been really encouraging to see the amount of cooperation they're giving to each other in terms of the learning that they're getting as they're developing their techniques and working across this landscape. So that's always really, really beneficial. But for me, one of the big community benefits that we often don't talk about, I suppose it's particular to where you're trying to aggregate projects. So we're looking at projects where land owners and managers don't have the time, skill, or resources to go and do this themselves. So we're going to come in and help them deliver that and aggregate it up and give them an income that allows them to make decisions about diversifying their business, and in that way is retaining them and their skills in the community. And of course, we'll get restored peatlands, which has that much wider community benefit in terms of climate resilience, in terms of wildfire resilience, in terms of recreation, all the benefits that come from a fully functioning peatland. So there's a whole raft of benefits to the people across the piece. So where are we at? We had 3 pilots that we were funded to deliver through Irons and Ferns, one on a farm, one on an estate, and one on a common grazings. The farm work, we're halfway through the restoration already. The estate work, we're hoping to break ground next week. And with the grazings committee, we're currently agreeing with one of the grazings committees an area that we will design this winter for delivery next year. But that's proof of concept. We think it works. We think the finances will work. For investors to come on board, they want a really well-developed pipeline. So we're stuck somewhere slightly in the middle at the moment. So if anybody here's got any deep pockets, wants to come and talk to me about being an early investor, or has any ideas about how we might fill that gap to get to that point where we're aggregating these projects up across a vast landscape scale, then please do come and talk to me. But I hope that's given you a flavour of how we've fundamentally changed how we work, because this is about delivering it for a resilient community within a resilient landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenna. Are there any questions for Kenna?
Thank you. Really interested in hearing that you became a charity. What was the process to become a charity? How long did it take? And what were the main obstacles?
Expertise was an obstacle. We are not charity experts, but one of the benefits of having the Irons funding was that we got a grant to bring in a charity expert, who's now the Chief Executive of the Southern Uplands Partnership, Cara Gillespie, and she guided us through that process of applying to Oscar to become a formal charity, and guided us through the process of deciding which type of charity to be, so a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation. Yes, the challenge is having the expertise and the time to be able to do that.
Sorry, behind you we see Matt being loaded up on the screen. So just Matt, so you're aware, you are already on screen. Any other questions for Kenna?
Hi, Sandra Moran, Cumbria Wildlife Trust. You just mentioned at the end there about deep pockets and those funders. And thanks for your transparency on that. I'm not sure if you can share with us how critical that gap is. So you've done your financial planning, you've got a viable financial model, you're employing the Peatland Code. Is the requirement for that sort of seed funding or accelerating funding critical to the success of the project, or is it more of a bonus? If you can answer that at all.
It's going to be critical, this next phase. So we've had discussion with potential investors, but it's looking at that, how much of the PIUs might be, what proportion of PIUs from these first projects might we need to sell to give us the income to have enough peatland restoration officers to go out and do the design and delivery of the projects. So there's that sweet spot of, well, it's a risk-based decision on what proportion of PIUs you might be willing to sell and at what price. For any potential buyers. Obviously, it would be much nicer if it was a philanthropic investment to start with, for people to see the benefit of bridging that gap for us to allow us to get to that future point. But yeah, it's been very interesting in that there's been a lot of interest, but actually people putting an offer down on the table is not that common yet. Some of the investors that are out there that are interested in this market, you know, there's so many things out there in terms of the carbon market that are leading to quite a lot of uncertainties. So getting people to put pen to paper is quite challenging.
So we take one last quick question and then we'll move over to Matt. Thank you.
Linda Marquis, Yorkshire Peat Partnership. Hi, Kenna. Congratulations on the designation. Well played. You were talking about engaging young people and getting them involved in peatland restoration. I'm just wondering what format that took. Was it formal learning? Was it workshops?
Well, this most recent one was basically a week in the field. Well, a week based at the First Nard Flows Nature Centre, the field centre there, and it was people taking through these young people through the notions of peatland restoration and what it looks like, but then being out in the field with contractors, experienced contractors, talking about how to do it, what machinery they might need. So just going through what it would be to build a business, to be able to be a contractor out in that landscape. That's the most recent thing, but I mean, I think Becky Shaw's here, isn't she? And she's working with Peatland Action through Nature Scot and developing a lot of these types of training courses and week-long sessions as well.
Great, thank you very much, Kenna. We'll now move over to our online speaker. Unfortunately, Professor Matt Hannon was not able to join us in person, but he's very kindly agreed to give us a presentation online. So Matt is a professor at the University of Strathclyde, and he'll be talking to us about his work. So yeah, Matt, over to you. Let me know if there's any issues.
Thanks, Renée. I can't see anything, and I'm getting sort of intermittent microphone since I think the laptop was moved over, so I don't know whether you can hear me.
Sorry, yes, we can. I'll type to you.
Good, okay, well, so let me try and share my slides then, hopefully these will come through. Can you see those okay in presenter mode?
Yeah, that's all good.
Yeah, you've got those clearly?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'm flying a bit blind here, so I'm going to crack on. If there's any issues, just put it in the chat and I'll pick it up. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here today, albeit virtually. It's a real shame I can't be there. My apologies for that. I think you've had a few really excellent talks, and probably, and this isn't a bad thing, a fair bit of mirroring and echoing of some of the key points that have been raised. But that, I think, maybe points to some consensus that's building in this space at a time which is very much needed. So my name is Professor Matt Hannon. I'm director of the newly established Strathclyde Institute for Sustainable Communities. We're a cross-faculty institute. We're shared between Strathclyde Business School and the Faculty of Engineering. And we're sort of really established as a centre of research excellence to explore the ways in which we can unlock more sustainable livelihoods for communities that really empower and enrich communities, urban, rural, and not just in Scotland, but far beyond. What I want to refer to today is some work that we undertook actually in conjunction with Rachel. I think that's maybe where some of the parallels are brought out, but a project which was funded through the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland, the Ferns project, which has now moved on to its second phase. And through this first phase, a team at the University of Strathclyde, led by myself, were asked to do a sort of deep dive into what the sort of cutting-edge research was. Sorry, Renée, are you okay? I didn't know whether you were talking to me. No, I'll carry on. Into the community participation for community benefits from natural capital projects. So really the question here is, how do we want to participate with and co-create with communities to understand what benefit they need and want and how best to create that? And if you want the underlying report to pick up, the QR code here should lead you directly to the download site. But let me give you some of the sort of highlights from that. So let's, with the old gesture of what do we mean by a community? So we've kind of kicked this around for a while now, and I'm sure this definition below will be agreed with by some of you, contested by others. We very much welcome feedback. This is kind of where we are currently in terms of trying to define this. But we're looking at it as a collective of people, and a real emphasis on the word collective there, who are connected through a shared sense of identity, which is distinctive either in terms of place, such as a defined geographical boundary, and or practice, such as shared interests, motivations, and values. I think these notions of community of place and community of practice are well trodden, but when we talk about a particular natural landscape, I think often maybe trying to align the two of these together and overlay these adds a layer of complexity that is very much needed when asking the question of who do we participate with and why. Okay, so we've we looked at community, the question is, well, what do we mean by benefit? And I think that if Mike wasn't great, but I picked up from the audience a really interesting question there about what we, from different community perspectives, will take a different tack on what is beneficial and what is not. And what was interesting through this research, through our literature review, was how often, particularly in practitioner circles, how often community benefit was often used almost in a slang fashion as an input, as a payment that might then yield benefit later. But we really found that quite dissatisfactory in the sense that, well, actually, really, when you think of benefit, it's the outcome of a process. It's and the perception from a particular person. So we were framing it and continue to frame it as a demonstrable uplift in the well-being of the community, either of place and or practice. And it's important there to kind of connect that outcome to output to input. So if we take that as a chain effect, the outcome might be an uplift in prosperity, happiness, independence, identity. And this is connected to the delivery of a specific output. That might be education, increase in jobs, habitat restoration, which are then the function of specific interventions driven by a range of inputs. Here we have investment, time, political capital. So when we think of community benefits, we have to think in terms of this process. And I think there's a really useful diagram which I won't be flagging here, but from colleagues of mine at the University of Aberdeen that talk about that connectivity between a natural capital stock, the impact on an ecosystem service, and the influence this has on a socioeconomic function. That might be, for example, agriculture, tourism, and then the beneficiaries. So thinking of this kind of chain link effect is very important. And the other thing that was very clear from our research was how these benefits can either be primary or secondary. Primary we were framing as something which is the primary impact or direct impact of a project. So if you are, for instance, restoring peatland, that might be about reducing flooding, improved biodiversity, cleaner water. Secondary would be maybe the way that project has been incorporated and governed, how that then yields additional benefits elsewhere or impacts elsewhere. So that might be, for example, the establishment of a community benefit fund, and then all the stuff that sort of falls out the back of that. So just a couple of points to note here, and I think we're going to maybe echo a bit of what Rachel said, but and what colleagues in the audience have said. What is considered a benefit is highly subjective. What I deem a benefit is quite different from, on occasion, my friends, family, passers-by. So we cannot assume, and we should not assume, that two communities value the same things and need and want the same things. So I think that much is obvious. It gets a little bit more complicated when we're trying to understand why those communities take that standpoint. And there we really need to formulate a deep understanding of the community's resources, values, priorities, and histories. So I've just spent, in fact, the reason I can't be there or didn't travel down is I was in Cumnock in East Ayrshire yesterday and the day before, exploring, actually looking at their housing stock and how we decarbonise this. But the area there has a very deep history of mining, and it's really, really difficult. In fact, it's impossible to understand the people and the homes and housing that they inhabit, such as many of the prefab housing that was established immediately after the Second World War, without understanding the history of the mining industry and the decline of that. So we must be cognizant of history. And as Rachel said, we take a standpoint, we understand what maybe makes that community tick, what they value, what they don't want in a particular moment in time, but that will change and evolve. And we must understand and be prepared to flex and adapt to that evolution. So I've been trying to crunch this into a diagram, and like all good academics, it often ends up looking like an onion. We're not quite sure why, but the amount of onion diagrams in academic papers is far outweighs anything else. And here we have this trying to track community benefit in this sort of benefit or impact onion. Now I'm using impact because actually, benefit might be a disbenefit in somebody else's eyes. So let's think of this as impacts. Just bear with me for 1 minute whilst I try and explain this. Here we have in the centre some kind of intervention. So at a peatland conference today, let's talk about peatland restoration. This natural capital stock, in terms of the peatland and the underpinning stocks that surround that, will then provide a whole set of ecosystem services. That might be in terms of biodiversity, the water cycle. And then that has some connectivity into these socioeconomic impacts. So these symbols try to point to whether it's clean water, tourism, agriculture, flooding. And these are then felt at different scales, these impacts, so local, regional, national, international. So if we take carbon, for instance, this is very much an international impact, whereas we might be looking at much more local or regional level if we're talking about flooding. But then we bring in time, that time dimension. And here I divorce between longevity and impact. So the longevity is how long the impacts will be felt for through the impacts of that natural capital intervention or restoration. But also the timing. It's when you're presenting this to a community, it's important to frame whether this is something that's going to come online quickly, medium term or long term. So this is the beginnings of what I think will help to frame maybe the participatory questions that Rachel's been referring to. But I'm quickly running out of time, so I'm happy to take questions on this, and I'm happy to circulate the slides, but I'd very much welcome people's feedback on that. Very quick note on the governance. So depending on what you do in the project and how you, for example, restore the peatlands and the way in which you do that on the ground in terms of actually the technical and ecological changes that you're implementing. That's one side of the coin. The other side is then how you go about governing the project. And we've heard there about some examples of one way in which restoration of the flow country. Now, the way that you govern this, for instance, how you incorporate the organisation, how you finance that organisation, this has big implications for the way in which and how democratically that project or projects are governed. So in terms of who benefits, that might be dividends, why they benefit, when they benefit, how they benefit. And there's a whole range of questions around control as well. And these have direct line to just this question. So distributional is the distribution of benefits and costs, procedural in terms of who controls these projects, and recognition, which is who's identified as part of that decision making. I haven't got time to get into the last bit, but I want to just make that point. Governance matters. It's not just what you're doing on the ground, it's how you're doing it, back at HQ basically, or with the community. Okay, so participatory approaches matter because you need to know the wants and needs of the community and the context that shapes these. And how a proposed project is perceived to impact a community, positively or negatively, and how it may be redesigned to strengthen its community benefits. And finally, the appropriateness and desirability of different governance arrangements. How could we possibly know this without connecting in with and building a trusted relationship with these communities? So I'm not going to talk about this wonderful ladder, which is in the report, developed by a colleague of mine, Jen Roberts, but it's kind of provides, connects all these different participatory ladders and spectra together. But please, it's in the report, strongly recommend as a way of kind of thinking about which. But what I wanted to do was just point out some of the guiding principles that we developed as part of this report, and I will gloss over some of them where I think Rachel spoke far more eloquently than I'll ever be able to. So on the back of this literature review, we identified 10 things that we were kind of recommending or encouraging stakeholders to do in terms of that participatory engagement with communities. So the first is that it should be bespoke, so conscious, often responsive to a community's unique characteristics and capacities. Legitimate and democratic, so offer equitable and consensual participation that's been co-designed with communities, and crucially built on that relationship of trust and power sharing. Again, Rachel, I won't go into that, did brilliant, fantastic coverage of that point. And inclusive, accessible to all. So if you're wanting to participate and able to participate, you have a ticket to sit at that table. Coordinated, we heard so much, and we continue to hear so much through the other projects we're undertaking about engagement fatigue, consultation fatigue. And in fact, there's a project we've just got going through our institute called a PhD titled A Little Less Consultation, a Bit More Action, Please, a nod to the the King Elvis, and really and flippantly framed, but very serious issue. We don't want to talk, we want to do. So we need to integrate and connect those activities together so they're joined up, and to avoid consultation where it's unnecessary. To resource, we need to make sure the stakeholders and the communities are tooled up and trained and skilled to be able to engage as efficiently and as effectively as possible. This takes time, and we want to make sure that time it lands valuably. Lasting, this isn't just a flash in the pan, that this is built up over time, and that this participation is embedded, and stakeholders become embedded in those communities. It's proportionate. You don't need to go very deeply on shallow issues, and you shouldn't go shallow on the very deep issues. So, this needs to be proportionate. And I think part of that goes back to Rachel's point that we should make clear where the limitations of communities' influence lie around a question. There's no, as I was brought up with this point, don't ask the question if you don't want to hear the answer. So it's a very, very important point. You need to be clear and transparent there. Targeted, timely, longitudinal. It needs to flex. It might be that you have deeper periods of consultation and shallower periods of consultation, sort of accordion-like, and that again will draw out the best in the community. Transparent in terms of methodology, rationale and purpose of the participation, and finally accountable and reflexive. So we must learn, monitor and evaluate, and then do something with that learning. And again, Rachel makes that point. So look, I've run out of time. What I won't rehash the conclusions because hopefully they've landed. I just want to point to two follow-on projects. The Ferns project is continuing. Rachel from Deciding Matters is very much part of this, as are other colleagues, Scottish Land Commission. And really, we're trying to take this community benefit standard and the participation, which is part of that rubber stamping of what looks good versus what doesn't. And we're testing this with communities now against projects, and so some of you in the room may indeed be involved with that. And the idea is that this will then inform and connect in with the British Standards Institute and the DEFRA's Community Benefit Thematic Standard, and I sit on their Strategic Advisory Board, so very close to that. And finally, as a separate project, in conjunction with Foundation Scotland and others, we're looking into good practice principles for community benefit funds. Looking at renewable energy projects, but I know a lot of these CBFs are starting to spin out of natural capital projects. So there's a tremendous amount of learning that I think many of you in the room hopefully value from that. So any further follow-ups, please, emails there, our Institute page is there, and many of the issues that I've talked about and the cases are covered up on our podcast Local Zero, so please check that out. So thank you for listening. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Matthew. So we're going to try and take some questions. The way we're going to do it is that I'm going to let you in a room ask a question. My colleague is just going to then repeat the question for Matt, so he can actually hear it. I can't
hear very well through the mic. So
I know. Yes, we are on that.
Clear, yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, does anyone have a question?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. So a lot of the rural communities that sort of undergo these restoration projects suffer with a lot of rural poverty, food security, poor education. Is it a bit sort of insensitive to be like, look at all the benefits you're getting from these ecosystem services when they've got much bigger problems? This isn't my area, sorry if this is not related, I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question, and I think the primary goal of the standard is to understand how one has landed on a particular project and the way that the community has been participated with to co-create and shape that project. Now, if that project lands on particular objectives or ends up migrating towards particular objectives that have just been noted, and that's on the back of community participation, then the standard's kind of done its job. I don't think, and again, I'll defer to colleagues who are closer to the second phase than I don't think the standard would prescribe particular objectives, such as those aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals or the national outcomes for the National Performance Framework. And I think that would be for other certification or indeed standards to encourage.
Okay, so we're gonna do an activity called Fruit Salad, which is actually mostly played in schools, but it is really useful for community engagement activities as well, especially if you are working on a project that is potentially bringing in community groups with polarizing ideas, because people will often sit next to somebody they already know and already agree with. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out a statement, and if that statement applies to you, you're going to have to stand up and move to a different table. We want to ensure that every table has at least 4 people at it, because we are going to be doing some conversations and answering some questions at your table. So I'll give you a sec to grab your things.
So we would like to just to take half an hour to think about these kind of questions, because these are the questions that, as you probably have heard the whole time, they keep on coming back, they come up. And everyone, I think we're getting closer and closer to answering some of these, or having more of a agreed, accepted answer to some of these, but there's still a lot of that we don't. And for us, so I actually forgot to start with who I am, but probably would have been helpful. But yeah, I manage the Peatland Code, and obviously we are looking at how can we make sure that communities are included in our projects, and if we can have them benefiting, and it doesn't have to be monetary, it can be all sorts of benefits. So that's why I'm running this workshop, because I'm stuck with some of these questions. Luckily, there's a lot of good work going on to help us with that. But yeah, it would be great. So if every table hopefully is able to come up with some discussion around these 3 questions, write some keynotes down, because I will take them with me and read them all, and hopefully it will inform some of my thinking, our team's thinking, of how we can move forward with some of this. At the end, the last 5 minutes of the session, it would be great if 1 or 2 of the tables are willing to just, I don't want you to give me a full run through of what you've been talking about, but I do want, just if there's been a highlight or kind of a key moment where someone's like, that's new, or I've not thought about that, or something that's that made you think slightly different than you've done before. It would be great if you can get some reflection on that. So the speakers and myself will be roaming around. We just go and check in on you, we give you heads up when it's kind of time to move to the next one. If you have a really interesting discussion about one of them, and you're not ready to move on, don't. I want this to be useful, and don't want to force you to do something. But yeah, you can read them all. Yeah, great. Start, please. I hope you have good discussions. And write something down as well on the flip charts. Thank you. Right. Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to draw you all back in, hopefully for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll let you all go. I've been listening in to all the tables, and I think it's been really interesting. I've heard very different conversations, but also there was some really things that keep on reoccurring. Indeed, defining the community is key to actually, if you then want to move further. Uncertainty, risk, all of that's been, I think that's been a theme we've heard throughout. I do hope that it doesn't mean that you think you shouldn't do something. So hopefully we've got you engaged. For me, as you are part of my community, my local community, of who I want to engage to make sure that on the ground the local communities are engaged as well. But yeah, is there someone who is willing to stand up and share a little bit about what they've been talking about? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll say this very well, but this is in the context of lowland peat. And we had quite a discussion about the community, and in this context of lowland peat, the community is often a sort of an agricultural community, sort of a reference to the lassie before who mentioned other problems that might be a priority for them rather than our peatland priority. But we had quite a discussion about community and representing the community and who to go to represent the community, and possibly not the parish council. But interestingly, we talked about maybe it's the people who are most affected by wetting up, for example, in the case of peatlands. But then the concept that actually the community is a collective rather than individual people was quite a big one to think about, and that's I'm going to think about that a bit more, really. A collective community rather than individuals. It's quite a different way of thinking about it. I think we decided. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else that wants to say something? Yeah, thank you.
So in relation to the last question about quantifying non-financial benefits, we were talking quite a lot about how there could be a creation of some kind of citizen and community online network where individuals and organisations could all be reporting community benefits that they're seeing onto a centralised hub, similar to, I think something exists, the National Biodiversity Framework, where people could be sharing the benefits they're seeing of their respective projects. And then within that you could have peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and support. And if certain communities are seeing certain benefits, then there might be identifiable benefits for others in the future too. Does that cover it? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Great. Well, thanks everyone for actually really engaging with this and writing all of that down as well. I am going to take them all home and digest them next week, not this week. But yeah, and we've been talking about like how can we, what's next and how can we continue this conversation. So we keep on thinking about that, and hopefully, we can do something else soon as well on this. But yeah, please help me in thanking all of our speakers once more. Thank you very much. We've got our closing plenary at 3:30 in the auditorium. I can't speak anymore. I'm done. Coffee, it's time for coffee.